If we could start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Special meeting, so no agenda items can be added or deleted. And our first agenda item, item 1.0, discussion of the proposed, let me try that again, discussion of and possible action regarding the 2012-13 Board of Ed budget. There we go. All right, do we have any discussion regarding the 2012-13 budget? Mr. Kemp? I want to recognize you.
I didn't know you might go over some of these other items, but that's all right. Recently, I became aware of some funds that I'd like to talk to you about, and in front of you are 2 pages that I think you each have. I understand Kyle also did some research and found out about the same it's called a piece of money, and it's called the Excess Cost Student-Based Supplement Grant. Apparently, it's also referred to as a May payment. It's $128,580. And the letter that you have is from an official from the state of Connecticut informing towns and boards of ed, I'm not sure who it's addressed to here, to superintendents, school business officials, and town finance officers. So everybody at the town administration level is aware of it, or should be. And it's dated May 3rd. To make a long story short, this amount of money being referred to as the May payment is to come to the Board of Education. It's not an option of the town to keep it, and it hasn't been sent over to us. And when I'm done explaining this, I'd like to have a motion seconded that we require the town to transfer, and I'm not using the words request, that we require the town to transfer $128,580 to the Board of Education budget within this fiscal year. So if you'll take a moment and look over the letter.
Mr. Percy, sorry.
I want to point out the 2 bullets, because there is some stipulation around the money. One of the first one says if sufficient local funds are appropriated to cover the cost of special education students, there is no restrictions on the town's use of the new state grant funds. But this year, if you read the second one, if however insufficient local funds are appropriated to meet such special education expenditures, which is where our problem is this year. So that's why we can request this money. Thank you.
Well, it must. It's not just a request. It must. And so it goes on to say the town must turn over the new state grant money to the local Board of Education or credit the amount, the appropriate amount of education's expenditures account, i.e. the state grant funds must be used to support those additional costs. So, unless you have any questions, I move that the Board of Education require the town to transfer $128,580 of student-based supplemental funds, commonly referred to as the May payment, to the Board of Education.
I have a motion. Do I have a second, Mr. Percy?
I'd love to make that second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Dr. Conway, did you want to speak?
I'm sorry, Mr. Picard and I would like to make sure we use the right vocabulary. This is to reduce our expenditures, and so we really need to get that into motion in some way. So this is not an additional appropriation. This is purposely, as in bullet 2, as Mr. Percy just read, to reduce our expenditures. So the appropriate Board of Education expenditures account, special ed. Thank you, I'm sorry to interrupt.
So, Mr. Kemp, would you be willing to have a friendly amendment to add to
No, that's
the
simply a
motion?
clarification of my intention and Kyle's, so
Agreed.
Right. Any other discussion? Mrs. Arndt?
I'm curious about, as in the previous year, this is not the first time that funding has gone to the town, and it could have been turned over to the Board of Education for shortfalls in special education. This is not the first year.
Thank you, Mr. Holt, through you. This is the 4th year of that grant. The first year was 2009-10. It can only be used if we are in a deficit situation. And so we would have to go back and see. This year, it's quite obvious we are in a deficit situation in special education. The other years, I think the excess costs did offset, but we would have to double check that. But otherwise, the town can use it as they see fit.
Would it be appropriate to do that, Dr. Conway, to go back to 2010 to make sure that we did not receive money that we should have received?
Yes, and I think Mr. Vaccaro is doing that.
Thank you.
Mr. Percy?
I also want to point out the state has never fully funded that 100%. So we're always technically in a deficit because the money we request, we've never gotten 100% in excess cost reimbursement. Hope I got that one right.
Ms. Goldich?
This is called the May payment. Is it only annually, or is there another payment made during the year?
Mr. Percaro, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman. They call it the May payment because it's once a year, annually in May. And if I may add, just to put all the facts out on the table, what we have learned after receiving this memo is that, in fact, to Mrs. Arndt's point, the money has been coming in since the fiscal year 9-10, and it has gone to the general fund. Again, the stipulation in this memo, this was the first year we received this clarification memo, probably because other items to the state, from the state to the local budget have been cut, and so the state had provided this clarification to the local and board officials to really specify when the money should be used by the boards of ed, and it's, as Mr. Percy said, for deficit mitigation purposes in our special education accounts. The money has been, from what I understand, in speaking with the controller and the finance officer in the town in years past, has already been utilized as part of the end of the fiscal year general fund. So it's swept, it's not sitting in a special revenue account, so those funds no longer exist. And in closing, we did verify already this afternoon that the funds are budgeted as revenue for the town. So any reduction, any reduction of this money from the town side has a direct impact on the tax base on the town side, and that was the direction of the finance officer. So he wanted us to be aware of that as we look at the use of these funds.
Ms. Arndt?
I might be allowed to think out loud for a minute, that I wonder how much other money goes to the town general fund that is generated or appropriated for the Board of Education and used for the purposes of the town side, for lack of a better word, budgeting, which I understand it's basically the same pocket, but that also means that the Board of Education takes heat every time we ask for an increase, when really the town side is keeping money that would offset the dollar amount that we go to the town and are hassled about. Is that an appropriate assumption? Explanation? I mean, that they are using Board of Ed money. I realize it's the same pot, but the politics of it is we have to go, we look like we're asking for all of this money, and actually if that money went through the town general fund into the Board of Education budget, we would ask for less from the town.
Mr. Percaro, would you like to respond?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. I asked that question of Mr. Lewicki on the phone this morning, and the rationale that was presented to us in this particular case, so not speaking into other sources of funding that you may be referencing, and it says in Mr. Mahoney's letter, the original intent apparently was that the public transportation grant, through legislation that was enacted in fiscal year 10, reduce the town's share with some guidance provided by the state from Mr. Lubke that the difference would be made up to the penny in the special ed excess cost. And so that apparently has never been clarified until this year, and now we have learned pursuant to this guidance memo from Mr. Mahoney, the Chief Finance Officer at the State Department of Ed, that yes, it appears that that is true only if the town, only if the Board of Education is not experiencing a deficit in the special education account. So, you know, that this is new guidance for us to have.
This account aside, it's,
You can respond, you still have the floor.
okay. This account aside, it still makes me wonder how many dollars are in the town budget generated by the board that we have no knowledge of.
Mr. Kemp?
Well, I wonder the same thing, and I don't mind talking about it for a long time, but there's a motion on the floor that really this isn't an appropriate conversation until this is voted on. And I'd be glad to pursue Michelle's thought, because I have some of my own about the same thing. But I'd like to ask if there's other questions specific to this particular letter and the motion at hand that I can try to answer or have somebody here.
Ms. Golditch, is your
Don't know.
question regarding the motion or the dollars associated with the motion, or?
No.
Okay. I recognize Mr. Kemp's point of order that we really should be talking specifically to this motion to get $128,580 back from the account. And then we could, once we vote on that motion, we could take up other issues after that. So if there's no other debate on that, I will call that motion to a vote by a show of hands. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Mr. John, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think Michelle had a good point, and I didn't mean to cut her off, but I wanted to get this business done. So I think it's important to talk about. So I want to say something about it, but Michelle, it was your initiation. Would you like to continue?
You're yielding the floor to Ms. Arndt.
I'm good, you go ahead.
You can continue, Ms.
Well, it's in addition to the possibilities that Michelle raises, I can tell you that there may be funds that they keep all year long and don't give to us until they're good and ready. And I'll give you an example. It was only as a result of legislation that stopped ECS funds from sitting in town hall and letting the Board of Ed swing in the breeze with operating funds until the end of the fiscal year. And then finally, the town side, in this case Vernon, would send the funds over to the Board of Ed. Meanwhile, they had us in freezes and all kinds of things to try to accommodate our budget crises that were in some respects contrived. And so legislation was passed that said that the towns had to transfer, I forgot whether it's monthly or quarterly, ECS funds so that we could operate more efficiently, pay our bills, and not go into freezes. So that kind of thing may still be going on in other funds because it was only the ECS funding that was a subject of legislation. So in addition to what they may be keeping, I'd like to know when they send things over, and is that appropriate as well?
Thank you. Ms. Golditch and Ms. Hunt.
My question has to do, is for Mr. Picaro. If you, and going back to, was it 2010, you're going to be looking at records, what is the, and you discover that there are in fact a significant number of dollars that should have been passed to the Board of Ed, what's the remedy going to be?
Mr. Carl.
Mr. Chair, that's a good question. First, if we're talking about these funds are gone, from what I understand. They're not sitting in a special revenue account and a non-lapsing account at the town.
The 128, you mean?
Correct, and it's been consistent at 128.
Just clarification, that's past years, the
Yes.
128 is still there.
And that's what I'm referring to. In previous years, it's been 128,500 in previous years, not just the current year.
Oh,
So
so that's
since
a constant
9/10,
figure?
that's been a constant figure. And it's been in the town's budget revenue projections as such as well. So from what I was told today by the town finance department, that money has gone into the general fund. It's been used for budget purposes on the town side of operations. It's not sitting in a special revenue account, a non-lapsing account that has been growing for years that we would be able to retrieve. So if the funds aren't there, they would have to come out of the current year's budget. This is likely the scenario how it would play out.
Thank you.
One question I'd just like to get clarified. On this letter that we see in front of us, it does say superintendent of school business office, or officials. Have we received this, or do we recall seeing this letter?
Electronically.
Okay, so you
Yes.
have received it electronically?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall receiving it in past years electronically also, or?
From my experience here, we received the notification that we were going to receive the excess cost. So we always receive the confirmation, and this is what we were waiting for to confirm our numbers for our budget mitigation plan.
Okay.
So we usually get the letter looking for the following revenues are now considered final, and then that's what we can bank on receiving and determining what our percent reimbursement is going to be. That's how we determine to be 74 versus the budgeted 65% for the current fiscal year. This additional guidance was new, and as I said earlier, I think that's because there's been other cuts made to the municipal side of state aid, and folks are looking for money everywhere. And so other boards, to Mr. Kemp's point before, have access to these funds.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion. If we receive a second, I'd like to address the motion, if that's okay with the chairperson. I move that the administration research board-generated revenues that go to the town that are allowed to pass through to the Board of Education and report back to the board.
And Mr. Kemp, all right, Mr. Percy, sorry.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. And the motion is to research. Ms. Sarni, can you speak to the motion?
I'd like clarification from administration, probably particularly Mr. Picaro. This, to me, my intention is to be more aware of not just our awareness, but town-side awareness, town council awareness, perhaps, of the revenues that the Board of Education generates, and what of those revenues should be passed through or allowed to be passed through. I know not all of them can be passed through the board, but so that we better understand the funds that we generate, the funds of that generated, the amount of that generated fund that the board actually sees, and what is over there that's intended for board. I meant it when I said I really wonder how much money is sitting there that the board is not aware of. Maybe we don't have access to it, but I'd like to understand the funding that we generate that goes to the town. Is that appropriate?
He's acknowledging you, so I'm
Saying
saying yes.
yes.
He's
Yes,
saying
Okay.
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Percy?
The other night at the town council chambers, we found, I should say Michael, I think Michael found money called the Cigna Shared Returns Premium Stabilization Funds. We spoke about it Monday night in the negotiation committee meeting. I don't know if it came, the board is aware of it because I was over there. That's almost $320,000 that can be used for whatever the board needs to use it for, that we didn't know was sitting over there. So there's another perfect example of what Mrs. Arnke said. All right, yes,
Mr. Kemp?
I'm all for the motion, just so we're all clear, pass-through is a legal term. Some funds pass through straight to the Board of Ed, not all the funds that stop at the town that we have to go request, but there's, so I think that we're limited in what we can expect to come over here, but we do have every opportunity to expect to receive the legal pass-through funds that is subject, I think, of Michelle's motion.
Ms. Sarni?
The intention of my motion was to educate us, basically, so that there's a knowledge for board members and for town council members that this is the money that is generated by the board, and some passes through and some does not, and the money that doesn't pass through, or the money that should pass through, should pass through. So it was really, my intention was to educate us about the exact thing that you're talking about, Mr. Kemp. Not to go running to collect money, but to understand revenue generated and revenue not received.
Mr. Kemp?
That's fine with me. Kyle, I don't know if the money you're referring to is,
I haven't gotten there.
what?
I haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, you said 300,000.
No, he was referring to the 319,000 that
I'm
we
sorry.
talked about on
Okay.
Monday evening, which the board took action to make a request to have funds transferred to cover the same deficit that we're thinking we can plug with this actual dollar amount.
Okay.
Mr. Percy?
To bring up a little bit more, the administration here, business office chased down the Medicaid money this year. The town only, but that money goes straight to the town. It's Board of Ed money that goes into the general fund. The town budgeted $40,000. We would expect to receive around $240,000 this year. So there's an extra $200,000 the town did not budget for, that the Board of Ed chased down, that didn't get us any benefit. But yet, we went and found that money. And our tuition, our special ed tuition is $100,000 over what the town budgeted for. So there's $300,000 there that the town will be most likely using to cover their debt.
Mr. Kemp?
Kyle, would you elaborate on your statement that we went and found that money? What do you mean?
Mr. Percy, I was actually going to defer to Mr. Picaro. I
Gonna
think
do the
he's
same
the
thing.
best person to answer that question, Mr. Kemp.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chairman. We've been using a company to process our Medicaid reimbursement claims for several years, and when we looked at what was potentially available to us for reimbursement purposes, we noticed that there were things that we could have been submitting reimbursements for, but were frankly not, based on guidance that was received from the vendor. So we switched vendors, and we found a vendor that worked very closely with us, educated us, came to our offices, spent quite a bit of time with People Personnel Services, Mrs. Buell and her staff, and working together with them, we found many things that we are now billing for that we previously were not. I can give you an example to put in perspective. In a student's IEP, there's things in there that if it's included in the IEPs, for example, let's say it's an iPad for communication purposes or other ancillary services, PTOT, speech, some of those things were not included in IEPs in the past, or documented as such in a certain way that would allow us to access these reimbursement funds from the Department of Social Services, who administers the Medicaid program. We are now billing for those in a new system that's being monitored. There's quality assurance being looked at it to make sure we do reviews of charts with this company to make sure we're squeezing every dime we can from this reimbursement process. So based on that, we realized that we are tracking to bring in between $200,000 and $250,000 in Medicaid reimbursement. The town, as Mr. Percy indicated, has been budgeting revenue from us in the sum of about $40,000 per year because that's what we've been traditionally bringing in. So that is correct that we would be exceeding that amount, difference of what we actually bring in and the town's budgeted revenue. That money does not come in one check. It comes in several checks over a period of time. So just full disclosure, the tuition money we expect to receive in total, because those bills go out to other towns by the end of the current fiscal year. So by June 30th, we expect to see that realize that additional $100,000 in the town fund that collects those funds for us. The Medicaid money will take several months, probably the next 3 to 4 months, before we start seeing our totals get close to that $200,000.
Mr. Kemp, you throw the point.
Well, congratulations. I appreciate you being that efficient a manager that you were able to generate that kind of money. And just to make it clear for anybody who's watching, because we're on television, our budget meetings are on television, people out there might be interested to know that the Board of Ed does belt tighten, it does effectively manage its money, and this money that we're referring to in this case would not be there, which the town currently has kept from us, and we object to that.
If I could just ask one clarifying question to you, Mr. Picaro. The money, the increase in those Medicare monies that we've identified, I assume that may carry into future years. Has the town taken that into consideration in the upcoming budget year as revenue, that additional money?
To you, Mr. Chairman, I have not seen the budget revenue estimates for next year for this line item, so I'm not sure on that, but we can certainly find out and ask them.
Do they inquire to you about that, those revenues, whether we anticipate any higher revenues for things of that nature?
We have not provided that information. They have not acquired that information from us.
Thank you. Ms. Goldich?
For Mr. Picaro, also, so you said that there would be $100,000 that would be available by June 30th, so that would apply to the 12-13 fiscal year. The remaining $100,000 to $150,000 would apply to the 13-14 fiscal year?
I'm sorry, so that for the 150, I'm not sure where you came up with.
Well, you said the overall Medicaid reimbursement would be
Yes.
between $200,000 and $250,000.
Correct,
And you just said something about $100,000 being available by June 30th of this fiscal year?
correct. Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's tuition money from VOAG, special education tuition that comes into the town.
But that's not the Medicaid reimbursement?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
Separate account.
Thank you, my mistake.
If I may just clarify on the revenues to you, Mr. Chairman, we did not include these revenue projections to the town because we weren't aware of them at the time when they were asking for them. So this is new revenue that we're bringing in that the town would not have a chance to have the opportunity to know that we were budgeting for it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have just one more clarification. It's just as a clarification, the amount right now is 200 because we are going back in our expenses to do that, and we do not expect 200 every year, but we certainly expect a lot more than we were receiving.
That's right. And to the superintendent's point, in our presentation to the council, that's what we projected 150 for next year's budget.
Thank you. Ms. Bush?
Can any of these funds be carried over into the next fiscal year that we receive or that the town receives?
Mr. Picaro, I'm going to defer you, but I believe these go directly into the general fund.
That is correct,
That's right.
through Mr. Chairman. It depends on what accounts they go into. If it goes into the general fund, which I believe they have been going into, the tuition dollars and Medicaid. Medicaid funds as well, especially, yeah. It's all general funds, so we will not have access to them in the next fiscal year. They're not in the non-lapsing account.
Just to bring us back, we are discussing the motion to have administration research monies that come into the town on behalf of the Board of Education as revenues, whether they're passed through or whether they come directly to the town, and to report back to the board. Just want to make sure we know we have that motion. Sorry.
I was going to ask permission of the seconder to qualify my motion, to be sure that it was research board-generated revenues to the town in total, and then those that are passed through, so that we know total revenues generated and then what passes through.
Point of clarification, I'm sure the secretary should
Okay.
do that as well. If there's, Mr.
Just to add one more final comment. The Medicaid funds are unrestricted funds. So districts that receive these funds as a pass-through in other towns and other boards, that would be used at the discretion of the board.
Thank you for that clarification. If there's no other discussion, I'll bring that motion to a vote. By a show of hands, all in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Mr. Kemp.
Dean, I just wanted to circle back. That motion we passed earlier this evening on the 128,000 special ed excess cost state agency placement grant funds. What we are sending a letter over to the finance officer. That does not require council action.
Correct, it is required funds to be sent.
Right, so I just want to set the expectation that this is not going to force a special council meeting for that money. That just has to come to us. No action from the mayor, no action from the council, period.
Thank you. Mr. Percy, you have the floor.
Still speaking on our current budget year, as of Monday night, we were $137,150.94, still in the hole. So if we get that 128,580, we're still not covering our mitigation plan.
Correct.
So I would like to ask, I'd like to ask the business manager or the superintendent of that Cigna shared returns, assuming we get the 128,580, which we should, how much of that should we request from the council to make sure our budget in the current fiscal year is okay?
I'll tell you, our motion on Monday was to cover our deficit up to $200,000. So if we use this 128 and we have a $10,000 shortfall, we've requested that 10,000 difference would be transferred from the town.
Okay, I understand that, but I'm thinking they might want a hard number versus an up to number. So now, because that 200,000, if they just gave it to us, it would have covered, you sure?
We put it in terms of so that we didn't have to keep going back and forth with meetings on a specific dollar amount. We know we're going to have a deficit. We expect it to be about 130, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't have to come back. That's why we went to 200,000 as a board when we made our motion, and not to exceed that dollar amount.
So are we okay there then?
I believe we're in good shape, Mr. Carl.
Yes. The only thing I would respectfully add is in conversations with the town finance officer, he had requested that if we can provide a number by tomorrow, an exact number, because he would prefer his recommendation and advice to us to get this onto the council agenda for next Tuesday. It would be difficult for us to say exactly what it's going to be, and that's why the motion was presented as such, and appropriately so by the board at the last meeting. So if the board chooses to pursue that recommendation, we can certainly wait till the next town council meeting after that, and we'll have more experience and a much more accurate number. My recommendation would be at this time that we're making an assumption that we would get the 128,500, and so it would be $80,000. I would suggest we request the whole 200,000 if the board chooses to do so tonight and follow that advice, or we can move it to the next meeting.
Mr. Percy, you...
I think we should just request the money so we have it to pay our bills and close our books as soon as we can.
Ms. Goldridge, then Ms. Arndt.
If we only need, say, 10 of the 200, can we carry the 180 over to the next fiscal year?
No, that's the reason why we wanted to only get what we needed, because if we want to use the other 300,000 in next year to offset what we have to cut tonight, and we get 200 back today, any difference that we have remaining on our books at the end of the fiscal year, we have to send back to the town, to the general fund. So if we ask for 200 and we only need 10,000, we're sending that other money back to the general fund. So I don't think we...
CNR.
we can request CNR. Thank you for the clarification. We
Will
can
it be
request
available to us in the next fiscal year from the CNR?
to offset our budget or to do
Yeah.
special revenue projects.
Available for anything?
Anything that we can do with CNR. It has to be over a certain dollar amount. I think it's $10,000 is the minimum project cost, Mr. Carl.
Correct.
So then wouldn't it make sense to wait until we have hard figures so that we know we only need $11,922.42 as opposed to 200 grand?
Rhetorical question, or do you want him to answer your question?
I think I'd like to give more, I know we voted the other night to ask the town to move the 200,000, but if we can give them, well, up to two.
Up to, yeah. We asked that only the amount needed to cover the deficit was the way the motion was worded. Yeah, it would remain in that special revenue fund.
In the Cigna account.
And the Cigna Special Revenue Fund until we request it. And that's, that's where we can use that, and we can request that at any point.
In any fiscal year.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the Cigna Shared Returns Premium Stabilization Fund is a non-lapsing account, so that does not close at the end of the fiscal year and get swept back into the general fund to offset other expenditures. So that's in perpetual. So those funds that are available to us up to the 319 will be available to us next fiscal year, whatever we don't use in that account.
Thank you.
So our bottom line option would be to determine if we can get the 128,500 change, and then the balance of which up to 200,000 to request from that account.
Ms. Sarno?
The other evening when we made that motion up to 200,000, we were talking that 137 may grow, may not. We just wanted to be safe, but my understanding is that when you have, if we get the 128.5 and you do everything you need to do with your books and the ending balance is $10,000, then it would just be that amount that is being sent over to the board, and the remainder would stay. We're not going to get two and have to return it. We're only going to get what our deficit balance is when Mr. Picaro closes out numbers. That's what I thought I wrote.
That was our
before the other night.
understanding, Mr. Crowe, if you want to weigh in.
The council will be making that as a motion, and they're looking for a hard and fast number, and that's what Mr. Ludicky was asking for tomorrow. So Mr. Picar's suggestion a few moments ago was to still remain at looking at that up to 200,000, and so if it's 128 of this funds, then it's 128.5 and it's 71.5 that we would be asking for. And so there could be certainly some unexpended funds that would go back to the general fund, or could be requested by the board to go to the capital non-recurring fund as well. But we thought that was a safe amount. That was our suggestion on Monday night. The council is looking for a specific number.
And since we don't have the 128 in hand, we can't spend it, so it should remain at the 200,000 until.
That's up to the board.
Oh, well, that would be my opinion. I don't want to count my chickens until they're hatched. So when we have money in hand, then you can make the adjustment out of the 200,000. My suggestion would be to leave the motion alone until we know.
Mr. Kemp?
Well, they don't get to vote about the funds that we referred to. That has to come. That's state statute. They don't get to sit around the council and bemoan the Board of Ed expenditures and all of that like the other night. That has to come. So that 128,000 has to come, or somebody's breaking the law. The other difference, I really would defer to your judgment. So I don't think 200,000 is the number that we should be asking for that reason, because 128 has to come for this current budget. So I would almost defer to the judgment of Mr. Picaro, who will be right there at that time that we empower he or the superintendent to, because they want an exact number, and that could change tomorrow morning from this evening. And so at that point in time, somebody's going to have to calculate that, and it's not going to be any of us sitting around the table except Michael. So that thought in mind, it's what's your pleasure about empowering him to craft the specific number that they may need over there?
We could make an amendment to that motion, or propose an amendment to the motion we passed the other night to empower him up to a certain dollar amount if we so choose.
So what do you think? I don't know.
Mrs. Bush?
First off, are we obligated to give them an exact number, or is it a courtesy to be able to get this passed? And does it have to be at the next meeting, or could it be a few weeks down the road at a future meeting so that we can get a better number? I mean, are we in a position where we need to do this right now, or till we have good numbers?
Mr. Picaro, do you wish to speak?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, the request was as more of a courtesy for timing for the town to be able to put it on the next agenda, to give them time to look at it and take action on it before the end of the fiscal year. Mr. Ludicky, I did ask that question, could we wait till the next meeting? And the response was yes. It just cuts it close to the end of the fiscal year.
I would just like to clarify, one of the reasons why we put such urgency on it was that we had some indication that the town was not going to pay some of our vendor bills until we squared away what our deficit was. And does that change with any of this, Mr. Picaro?
No, through you, Mr. Chairman, after we presented our deficit mitigation plan and showed that our situation is in a marginal position, that is no longer a restriction imposed by the town.
Okay, so we're not under any restriction, or, you know, we're gonna get our bills paid.
Correct.
So if we did delay it, it doesn't have the same urgency.
No impact.
So just as a point of clarification, the other reason was Mr. Ludicky was under the impression that a town meeting would have to be held in order to transfer funds. That is 0.1% of the board, of the entire town budget. If it's higher than that, that's $80,000. We're now talking less than $80,000. And so it would not need a town meeting. It could be voted on by the town council if indeed this was an appropriation or a transfer above, as opposed to a reduction to expenditures.
Thank you for that clarification. So it does sound like we have more time to consider this and to let that number get more firm. But that, again, is, we did take a vote on Monday. If we want to alter that vote, I would suggest that we do make some type of a motion. Mr. Percy?
Well, just a suggestion, if it was up to 200,000, and now we're looking at that 128.5 coming back to us, if we make a motion for up to 75,000, because it puts us in the same position, it puts us under that $80,000 cap, so there's no town meeting problem. That kind of just, and then the number can wait, but we brought down our request, so it gets rid of that possible, because there's a discrepancy over there, they're not sure if we need to have a town meeting to get that Cigna shared fund. So, just a suggestion.
I'm willing to entertain motions. Mr. Picaro, did you have something you wanted to add?
The only thing I would add respectfully to the board is, there may be additional rationale provided by the town finance officer regarding the use of this 128,000 and change funding that they may have some concerns with us accessing it in some issue.
That contradict the letter of the memo that we have? Mr. Kemp?
I have no doubt he'll have concerns because they weren't intending to have this money come to us in the first place. So they can be concerned all they want. This is state statute, and after the other evening, I have every intention of enforcing the motion we made.
Mr. Percy?
I would just suggest we leave it alone then and move on to 2.0.
I'm good with that as well. That's the sufficient.
I have a question. If we were to set a specific number of $200,000 coming out of a Cigna account, and we only needed $50,000, does that $150,000 go back into the Cigna account, or do we put it in the capital non-recurring?
That would be, Mr. Chairman, that would be something that we would have to check. I believe it would have to go back into the capital non-recurring once it's pulled out of account, but we can certainly ask that question of the town finance department to see what our options are.
Because the motion that was to go up to $200,000 was they were only going to take out the exact amount that we needed at the end of the fiscal year. So the rest would have stayed in the Cigna account. So I'm kind of confused as to why they want a specific number right now.
Does anybody wish to take any further action on item 1.0 of our agenda, or do we want to move on? Seeing no more hands, we'll move on to item 2.0, which is the discussion and possible action regarding the 2013-2014 Board of Education budget. And I will turn this over to Dr. Conway and Mr. Picaro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You have a two-sided sheet that is titled Budget Reduction Worksheet. And the very top indicates where the budget stood. The current budget, the Board of Education request at 724, including the mayor's cut of $1.5 million, bringing it down to 413, and then the cut on Monday evening of $675,000, bringing it down to a 2.73% increase. The budget cut that the mayor had made was $1.5 million. You have already, in that next section, approved those budget reductions. That totaled $1,115,407. If you add that $675 to it, we have the total required reductions of the $675 plus the $1.5 million are $2,175,000. So remaining to be cut is $1,059,593. The administration has met, and it looks like we're missing the top number there, Mr. Picard. The administration has met this afternoon. You know that the turnaround time here was very tight, and has come up with several things. Do I have the wrong one? There we go. Thank you. The administration's met and has come up with some proposals for your consideration. You can see they're located by school. So at Northeast School, this was one of those cuts that the board did not make in the first go-around. It's a grade 3 teacher for $69,000. I did just receive an email from Mrs. Green, though, that I would be remiss. She has indicated that class sizes in grades 2, 3, and 4 will be 23 and 24, just for your information, and that 17% of the population of Northeast School is identified as special education, which is at the far end. I think our district rate is around 11%, 11, 12%. So that is much higher, just to let you know that. A preschool teacher will be removed there. We are going to get increased readiness funds, so we're not going to cut the program, and we are allowed to supplant that program using readiness funds. We tried to look K through 12. We tried to look as far away from the student as possible. And so we'll go through the other cuts. No one in the district is happy with any of these cuts, but these again are our proposals. At the high school, a 10-month secretary, that would be a full-time secretary. In addition, 2 secretaries moving from 12-month to 10-month, and a part-time secretary. It would be it's a .5 secretary. This is still at the high school. This was 2 paraprofessionals. These are clerical paraprofessionals at 35 hours a week. The total would be, they're clerical, that says paraprofessional secretary. That means that they do clerical work for $27,000. We do have a librarian, certified librarian, as well as a library manager and a library assistant at the high school, so we would be looking to reduce the library assistant. We have a paraprofessional 10 hours a week assisting in the English department in Read 180. We now do have a reading teacher up there. Not that this isn't a needed position. Again, these are all very tough cuts. A special education teacher, we would be combining 2 programs for students with significant disabilities. The security guard that was on your original list of suggested cuts. The 35 e-readers on the high school for the reading program. At Vernon Center Middle School, a paraprofessional who acts as a clerical person, that would be reduced. A full-time secretary would be reduced. 1 world language teacher. Our concern there, of course, is that the board has just added credits for world language required at the high school, 2 years of credits. And so this slows down and will most likely not allow our students to finish either Spanish or French 1 while they're in the middle school. They would have to start that at the high school. Most of them would not have that much experience to be able to do that. And the laptop cart, that was also in your list of suggested cuts. Across the district, Mrs. Buell has looked and believes that we can cut half of a special education teacher. The maintenance, the painter, we've been very fortunate the last 2 years. We don't want to give that up, but we feel that was also last in. Textbook adoptions, that zeroes out that account completely. That was on your original list of suggested cuts as well. That's all in mathematics and science, which are 2 areas that were just being revised, finishing revision. The rest of the Technology, excuse me, the other 10 smart boards, because 6 have already been cut, the 35 e-readers, the LCD projectors, and are all on this list. The midday kindergarten transportation, as you recall, when you take all day out, you have to put midday back in, which is what we did. This would now take the midday transportation back out. PD 360, that included 2 parts to that line item. One was the video library and online learning that we have now, and the other was the new evaluation tool that we need, that were required by the state of Connecticut. We have been informed that the state will provide the tool for evaluation for free this year. They are not providing the other half of that, the video library, et cetera. So even though we're cutting this, we would get the absolute needed part, not the wanted part. Student management system of $55,000. That was a $55,000 cut because there was $18,000 in the budget for iPass, which is what we currently have. So if we are able to connect that, we don't know. We don't want to give that up, but we are hoping to be able to connect that through the Alliance grant because data collection is so key for the Alliance grant and for student achievement. And so that is an area we're discussing with the state right now. So that brings the subtotal to $961,000. So we are short by about $90-some-odd thousand. The next 2 are risk accounts. One is an alternative learning school or a special education school, bringing that to the district. The risk in that is that in the first year, we certainly believe we can bring back the number of students to offset the cost of opening a school in town. At this point, if we put this in the budget as a savings, we would then truly have to aggressively recruit students from out of district, and the funding coming in from those students from out of district would have to directly reduce the expenses in this account. If that tuition goes to the general fund or to the town, then it is not worth doing. It's not going to save us any money at all, and in fact will eventually cost us money because as students come in, you need more paraprofessionals, more teachers, more supplies, etc. And so this would be, we would truly have to have this conversation with the town that any funding coming in to an alternative learning school must go directly to reduce the expenses in those particular accounts for those particular children. The last one is a projected vacancy rate, which was a new phrase for me. And that is in many businesses, over the course of the year, you do have vacancies. And so you do save funding between the time someone leaves and the time someone arrives and is posted into a new position. Oftentimes we have to offset those people, of course. If you have a teacher that leaves in December, you would get a substitute in there. So there would be a savings, not 100% of the salary, but there would be a savings. So we split the last amount between these 2 risk accounts. That would be truly the board's decision to make those. Those are not, those are our savings of what we might spend. They are not hard and fast line items that you reduce the budget. So those are, as we said, those are both risk accounts. And we just split the numbers between them. We're not sure where they could be. Certainly, if we bring in 5 students from out of district, then we will more than offset that entire amount. If the funding goes directly to reduce the expenses in that account. So that is the entire list. That does bring it up to the exact amount that the board was looking for. I will tell you that many other things were discussed, and we truly tried to stay away from the students. We did discuss things like, let's see, reducing programs at the elementary level, art, music, and physical education. We discussed reducing student support services such as guidance counselors and social workers. You know that's an area we are in desperate need of. We talked about pay to play, middle school sports, furlough days, additional supplies, closing a school, reducing music at the middle school, eliminating instrumental music at the elementary school. You can see all of these discussions went directly to families and their children and the children in school and their education. And so that's why we came up with the list that we did. Most of the administrative team is here and would be happy to answer questions if you had specific questions about those reductions or the effect of those reductions. Mr. Porcaro and Mrs. Rabat are also very well schooled in this list. And the list is still hot, I think. Was that recently?
Mrs. Bush.
Yes, you spoke of the student management system being able to use the funds from the Alliance District. Is there anything else on here that, besides possibly introducing the full day kindergarten, is there anything else on here that we could use the Alliance District money to make sure we get in place that are important?
Through you, Mr. Chair. At this point, we don't see anything else on there. The state has been very clear with 3 goals that they have: implementation of the Common Core, all children reading, and I forgot the third, I'm sorry, but they were very clear with their goals this year, a little different from last year. They're not quite the same. And so I do believe that the data they are asking us to collect would be a nexus and a close attachment to the student database management system. I'm not 100% sure, I will tell you. But I do know there were other districts talking about doing the same thing. I knew last year there were districts who did all-day kindergarten, so I'm not concerned about that. I'm a little bit concerned about the data management system, but I do believe we can tie it to what the goals are. I do not see anything else out here that we would be able to do that for.
May I continue just
The other
one more
question,
thing?
Ms. Bush.
You think the professional development, the PD 360 might fall into that category as well, because it is part of, the teacher education that would benefit the students directly?
It is possible. It is possible. I couldn't say for sure.
Thank you.
Ms. Sorn.
Dr. Conway, you explained that the alternative learning school would require tuition funding come through to the Board of Education in order to offset, not to incur more costs. May I ask Mr. Porcaro if those are the kind of dollars that are allowed to pass through the town to the Board of Education?
Mr. Porcaro.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, are you referring, to the alternative learning school?
Yes, yes.
As Dr. Conway had stated, we would have to ensure, in order before we take on this venture, that we could get those funds. They would go, currently those funds in the form of tuition dollars, as we're talking about the other tuition dollars, go to the town.
But legally, they could pass through. We're at the mercy of whether they do or not.
Correct.
But they can pass through. Okay. May I ask another question?
You still have the floor.
Could I ask Mrs. Buell about the special education teacher that could be eliminated by combining 2 programs? Could you just elaborate a little bit on the impact of combining 2 programs?
Sure. We developed a program this year to meet the needs of students that were returning to district at the high school. That program has been very successful. We've had several students come into the program and graduate out of the program. We also have a second program in the district at the high school that has students that are moving out. And so numerically, the number of students that we could manage in the one combined program is a manageable number. So we think that would be, we could meet the needs of all those students appropriately in that combined program.
Thank you. One more question?
Thank you. You still have the floor, Ms.
Is your expectation that we will do as we did previously and item by item make reductions until we get where we need to get to?
That is our choice. We can make a full motion, we can make partial motions, however we want to do it. It's up to this board how we want to take action. Mr. Kennedy.
I'm going to make a motion, and then I suspect there will be some motions to possibly divide an item, but for purposes of discussion, I'm going to move that the board reduce the $1,059,593 per the recommendations of staff as listed. Appreciate a second.
I have a motion from Mr. Kemp. Do I have a second? Mrs. Bush?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to reduce based on the recommendation of administration. Discussion. Mr. Person?
I can't support this motion. There are things on this list that I certainly, and I don't like any of it, don't get me wrong. I know reductions have to be made, but there are things on this list that that I cannot support. So, but at the same point, I don't want to, there's, what, 20 some odd things on here. We can do them one at a time, I guess, but
Well,
try to find a-
if you want, you could,
It would be appropriate, Mr. Percy, if you wanted to pull an item out, make a request to amend the motion to pull a certain item or two out of it, that if it makes the motion more palatable. Ms. Harper?
I'm going to move to divide, please.
divide
Separately, to divide separately.
This is a motion to divide separately, and is there a second? Mr. Percy?
I'll make that second.
So we got a motion and a second to divide. Discussion. Or is that a Okay, I'll call it to a vote on a motion. On a motion.
It's not discussable?
Did you have?
I did have a discussion.
Okay.
I
Motion to
understand
divide.
that a lot of these cuts would be very hard, and we didn't expect to have cuts that would be easy. But looking at this list, except for possibly the grade 2 to 3 teacher, it's not as much directly affecting the students. Possibly the special ed combination would also, but my feeling was that we really needed to do things that were outside of really hurting the students. And the administration team are the experts on where the cuts would be best. And so I would trust that they knew their buildings, their students, and their needs. And they would be able to make a decision on where the cuts needed to be made.
Mr. Percy?
I respectfully disagree, Ms. Bush. There are things on here that are going to directly affect a lot of students, such as the textbook adoptions. Our 6th graders are currently working with a brand new math curriculum that they'll have to go away from next year. The world language teacher of ECMS, so now our kids can't finish French or Spanish 1 before they get to high school. There's things on here that do directly affect students that I've checked off that I'm not, and I know we have to get to a point, I understand that, but maybe some other board members have other suggestions that aren't on this list. Thank you.
Other discussion? On the motion, this is a discussion on the motion to divide. Ms. Fisher?
I was just wondering if we could just divide, pull certain things out as opposed to dividing every single one. Like if people have specific ones they'd like to pull out rather than do each one individually. Is that a possibility?
That is always on. The motion is to divide and handle them individually currently. That's the motion that's on. Ms. Harper?
Not individually, specifically, I think is what
Yeah, the
You
current
referred to
motion on the
yourself.
floor is to divide and handle them individually is what I had heard, or to
No,
separate.
specifically, so that if there's,
Yeah.
we don't have to go one by one, we can discuss a particular reduction and make a motion, and vote on that, and in the end, it will be what's left, plus what we've made motions and voted on, that would be the cut. We don't have, motion to divide, we don't have to go item by item by item. Just gives you the opportunity to discuss those that you want to.
Mr. Kemp?
I agree. It doesn't have to be every single one. It might be a lot of them. And what isn't basically pulled, but if the motion passes, I would expect that it wouldn't be every single one of these, that it would be probably, I don't know, half of them or something, and the remaining would be there. And then we will vote up or down each one of the divided items. That's, I mean,
Okay, we have clarification on the motion to divide. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a show of hands. All in favor? Okay, it's unanimous, so we're going to take them divided. And does anybody wish to speak to any particular item? Mr. Percy.
I'll start with the books at the textbook adoption. Is that 143,000 all just, I know it's math and science. Can you give me a more specific breakdown?
It is mostly math, it's all math and science at the high school. Algebra 1 is the key text they were looking to align with the Common Core. Algebra 1 is Algebra 1, as it was when you went to school, when I went to school. But this brings it to another level. So Mr. Osmond is, obviously disappointed to put this on the table. It does not stop. If you remember, part of the mitigation plan was Mrs. Marasso's working with the publisher to bring the cost down so that we could purchase the 7th and 8th grade mathematics texts. So those will be purchased this year through the budget, the regular budget, because we were able to save some and bring that cost down. So this is all high school texts.
I was misinformed, I'm sorry. Not that that's... Thank you.
Ms. Goldich.
The amount of the Alliance money that's coming in for the next fiscal year was $719,000?
Through the chair, 730.
$730,000. And the amount that we were going to use of that money to pay for all-day K was
Approximately 500.
500. So that leaves $230,000 of Alliance money
That's correct.
that will come in next year. It's not possible for us to use that for technology that we do not have in the school system at the moment.
When we're buying things, that's a little different than purchasing services. And I think it would be a stretch to do that, to buy things. It would be lovely. I haven't heard of anyone doing that. I would have to check with the state. So I couldn't promise you that this evening. The software, the data package allows us to collect, analyze, aggregate, disaggregate data, which is all part of increasing student achievement. And so is the technology. There's no question about that. But I have not heard of anyone using it to purchase things. And that's just, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer for you. I can certainly get that tomorrow morning.
Well, if we're talking about things that directly affect students, taking all this technology out is going to have an incredible impact on our students. And I think we may be able to make a good case for using Alliance money to use technology to get us out of the bottom 30. My other question has to do with the special education teacher. Under RHS, there is a 1.0 special education teacher, and under district, there's a 0.5 FTEs. That's two different people?
That is correct.
Where is the other special education teacher located? Do you know?
The 0.5,
The
elementary
0.5
or middle, the 0.5. The one is at the high school. Mrs. Buell, do you mind?
The 0.5 reduction would be at the elementary level, and part of what we were looking at, there's no good cut to make, but what we looked at is maybe regrouping some of our students into some of our programs a little differently. That would require a couple students, which would ease the need in separate buildings. So I think it's, again, I think it's manageable. I think that it would still be an appropriate program for students. I wouldn't recommend if it wasn't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would respectfully request that you check to see whether or not we can use the remainder of the Alliance money for technology. The other question, you mentioned that you discussed pay to play. Can you tell me about that discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, we've discussed it. There are districts that do use pay to play. Our middle school sports cost approximately $35,000. Our high school sports about $200,000. So just looking at the high school, we have approximately 400 students who play sports. Some of them multiple sports. That would be 400 athletes, could be counted several times. And so if you divide that, you're talking about if you want to pay for the whole thing, you're talking $500 per student. That's certainly a hefty amount to pay, especially when you're going to run cross-country, which is nothing but shorts on top of the woods and the paths, as opposed to a lot of equipment. So if you're looking at that, it's very difficult, I think, for parents to do that. In addition, 40% of our students are free and reduced, so they would either be paying nothing or very little of that $500. So that would have to be offset by the board, or offset that by raising the cost for all students as well. If a student plays multiple sports, do you give them a discount? If a student if a family has multiple children in the school, do you give a discount? We absolutely would need clerical assistance, so the athletic director's secretary, who was part-time now, would absolutely have to go to full-time to manage this, to collect money, to keep the books, etc. And then that money would go directly to offset the cost of the coaches, the umpires, the referees, the equipment, and all that kind of thing. So it is doable. Many people do it. Most people don't charge $500 per student. So if they charge $75 or $100 or something like that, then you're offsetting a much lower percentage of the $200. So if $200,000, excuse me. So if you're charging $100, then you're really only offsetting about 40,000 of that. And so then you have to say, is that worth it? 40,000, we're now paying another half-time secretary. We're chasing down kids. Of the 40,000, we still have to offset free and reduced. It's more trouble than it's worth in that regard. If it's a message the board wishes to send, then that's certainly one that we would support. But when we're looking for hard and fast reductions, the number is not clear as to what we would be saving from that.
Well, towns do that in different ways.
Yes.
In Berlin, kids pay over $1,000 to play hockey because of the level of equipment that's needed,
Right.
which obviously we can't do.
Mr. Kemp?
And just to your point on hockey, I remember one night the hockey parents came in here and made it very clear the amount of money they kick in already. So in all respect, hockey's a very bad example. Those parents already pay a ton. But it is true that there are other towns that do this. A few years ago, we called some other towns and tried to find out how much revenue they actually brought in. And then, of course, they told us it wasn't very spectacular money after all, and that they had to spend all kinds of staff, 0.4, 0.5 of a person just to get that amount of money. And then so then we decided not to go that route, feeling that we would keep more kids and educate them better if they did more after-school activities. Just part of the reason we're a comprehensive high school as opposed to a magnet school that doesn't offer this stuff. So I really wouldn't favor going pay to play.
Mr. Percy?
I also recall reading something recently, and you can't quote me on this, that the legislature was trying to limit how much school districts could charge for pay to play. Obviously, that legislation may be dead already, but I did read something about that.
If I may, the bill is that it would require towns that do have pay-to-play programs must institute a sliding scale for free and reduced lunch students.
That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Ms. Arthur?
I respect the work that administration did to come up with a list like that, like they did. With the outside chance that board members may want to suggest supplements or replacements for some of those, I'd like to ask just a couple of questions to clarify something. Is the travel stipends, are those contractual?
Yes, they are.
Okay. In central administration account 51123, there is a vacancy, Kathy Revine, and a vacancy that has $44,100 in it. Could you just give me some information about that?
Yes, that was, the board had approved a human resources executive secretary position last fall. That was going to replace a person who retired on January 1st. And so that was part of the hiring freeze. That person we advertised, we have lots of applications, but we have not moved forward. That person is actually working 2 days a week, the person who retired, just to help us through the rest of this school year. And so that funding is for the HR secretary.
Okay. Can you tell me where I can find the gifted and talented teacher, please?
That would be in Mrs. Buell's. Got that line right away.
Right, 1113.
51113.
Yep.
Special education. Okay.
Pupil services.
Yeah, the white page is under special education personnel, Regina Reed.
Okay. May I ask Mrs. Buell, she doesn't act as a coach, I don't believe. Can you tell me how many students she works with or affects?
I couldn't tell you that number right off the top of my head. She is, her task is to support teachers to develop instruction that meets the different levels of students. So that's part of what she does. She, I think, works about 30 hours a day, and she offers some small groups and book talks, and so she does touch some students, but her primary task was to support teachers to differentiate instruction, and she does do that, and teachers have found that to be tremendously helpful. So she touches more students through the work of that she does with teachers. So I can give you, find a number if you'd like me to get that for you.
No, I was just looking for an essence, so no, that's fine, thank you.
Many.
Okay. And one more comment and suggestion. I'm concerned about the number of paraprofessionals and secretaries and teachers. I hope in the near, this evening, to be able to propose an alternative reduction to some of the paraprofessional and teacher and secretary time. I know in the past Mrs. Fisher has several times brought up reducing assistant principals, and I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to suggest someone in the, to some administrative reductions, not just teachers and paras and secretaries, but perhaps a shared, reducing one assistant principal and sharing a principalship between buildings, or some kind of a compromise to replace some of the, in my opinion, para and secretary and teacher reductions with no administration reductions demonstrated in the list. And I'm not quite sure how to coach that other than reducing an assistant principal, eliminating an assistant principal position, and then sharing between buildings. Perhaps it would be, their role would be as a discipline half-time in each school, something like that to compromise and spare some of the secretary, paraprofessional teacher roles. And one more question. The extended day transportation, 55911, that's 3 days a week? Am I right? I should say, is that late bus 3 days a week for $25,000? That's what that is, okay. That's still in our budget. We took that out. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, all the cuts at the, above the line have already been made. Those are the ones that.
Yeah.
Previously. Ms. Marasso wants to weigh in. I'll give Ms. Marasso the mic.
I would just want to remind for that in previous action through the administrative organization plan, there was a loss of administrators in the unit and a savings of $27,000 that the board previously cut in their action.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Other discussion on the motion, which was to accept the list, but to separate. Sarno.
I'm going to move to remove from the proposed budget reductions the grade, the teacher at Northeast School in the amount of $69,000. I'm very concerned about the impact on class size.
So there's a motion to remove the grade 3 teacher at Northeast School. Is there a second? Mr. Percy.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on that motion? Ms. Sarno.
Only that I recognize we can't take things out without offering something in its place. I understand that. So my hope would be that there would be some other places that we could discuss or compromise on to make up for that elimination.
Thank you. Mr. Kemp.
Well, I'd like to know what those are, because I'm not going to support this until I know what you have in mind to replace the 69,000 that has to go.
Ms. Fisher.
Well, as I understand it, we're basically just dividing it out right now and could possibly vote on it later if we didn't
Oh,
find anything else. Is
Well,
that-
Yeah, we're just pulling it
We're
off
just
of
pulling it off
the
of the
major.
big picture.
Oh.
Because your motion
You're not
was
asking
to
for an up or
approve the
down
whole
vote on this
list.
right now?
Just
Okay, well.
Just, the motion is
Well,
just.
we can set it
remove this
aside,
one.
that's fine, but to your point then, at that point in time, when it does come up for consideration, then I'd like to know what exactly you're gonna do to cover it.
That would come up later.
All right?
Mr. Percy.
I'm under the impression we're removing what board members want out of this list, and then we can vote on this list, because that is the current motion on the floor. So we pull out what we want, don't vote on them, just put them over here for now.
All right?
And then they can sit over there while we discuss other things, and then they can always be voted on. Correct.
That is
Okay.
correct. We're just dividing out those items that we do not want as part of the main motion. Ms. Fisher.
I'd like to pull out the 2 risk accounts at this point in time.
Okay, that's a motion to pull the 2 risk accounts. Do I have a second on that? Ms. Sarno.
Second.
Actually,
We already have
correct. We do
a
have
teacher
a,
on the floor.
we have to do the teacher first. I apologize. Unless we wanted to amend it and do them all together. I would say just do it one at a time, since we already have a motion by Ms. Ari and Mr. Percy on the third grade teacher at Northeast. Why don't we handle that first, and then we'll come back to you in a moment. All in favor to pull the teacher at Northeast School? Show of hands.
So long as we're pulling it for further
Yeah, we're
voting.
just pulling it off of this
Alright.
list at this point, so that has been reviewed. Ms. Fisher, your motion is to remove the 2 risk accounts from this list that we're going to approve.
Yes.
Is there a second on that? Ms. Sarno. Okay, now we have a second motion. Does anybody wish to speak to that? Mr. Percy?
I was just wondering if you have any rationale.
I don't know much about the alternative learning school yet, so I just
Talk
want a
about
little
it.
more information.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on that to pull the 2 risk accounts? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. All in favor? Okay, so those are also pulled off. Mr. Percy?
I'd like to remove the world language teacher from BCMS.
And do I have a second? Ms. Sarno?
Second.
Language at BCMS. And is there any discussion on the language teacher? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. And Ms. Fisher? Or check, sorry.
I'd like to pull the security guard because I'm not comfortable that the $22,000 is worth the trade-off. I would just like to discuss that further.
Security guard, Ms. Sarn, is there a second on the, Mr. Percy?
Second.
A motion and a second on the security guard at RHS. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor by a show of hands? Okay, that's unanimous also. Miss B can't yell at me if I get going too fast. Mr. Kemp.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, by no means has the town budget passed, right? So before we get too carried away with pulling everything we'd like to save here, which would essentially be all of it, I think we need to be cognizant of that.
Other motions? Ms. Skolich.
I'd like to pull technology. It would be the paperwhite e-readers from RHS, the laptop card at ECMS, the 10 smart boards, the 35 e-readers, and the LCD projectors from the district.
That's 35 e-readers, LCD,
Laptop card,
laptop cart, and, oh, e-readers, 35 e-readers, there we go. I got them all.
35 e-readers, laptop card, 10 smart boards, 3 e-readers, and LCD.
Okay. So that's a motion to pull 5 items. Ms. Arndt?
Second.
Discussion on that motion? Seeing none, by a show of hands, all in favor to pull those technology items? Okay, that's unanimous also. Any further discussion on motions? Okay, I'm going to bring us back to the main motion, and it is to pull, or to approve all of the remaining items that were on this list. And we'll get an accounting of what the difference is for Mr. Picaro after that motion. So by a show of hands, all in favor of reducing the budget by all the remaining items that were not pulled, signify by showing your hand, please. Show of hands. And those opposed, I show one opposed, the motion does carry. And if we could get a number, Mr. Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The board has just approved $732,945.56 in cuts.
Could you say that one more time, just a little slower?
Sorry.
Louder, too.
Louder?
The board has just approved $732,945.56 in cuts. We currently have $326,647.44 to go.
How much?
What's the balance? 326, 647.
44.
326, 647 and 44 cents is the remaining balance. Reduce, Mr. Cap.
Just looking for monies that we may not have identified yet. Mr. Picaro, have you any idea what the mayor was referring to the other evening when he said that there are sources of revenue in the form of contract flexibilities, quote unquote, that are available to the Board of Ed?
Mr. Picaro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not aware of any savings at this time, sir.
Dr. Conway?
If I may add, we did discuss that after the meeting, and it truly befuddled us as to where those savings would be, unless it would be in moving towards health savings accounts, and we certainly put that in the budget as we go along.
But for the purpose of this budget year that we're looking at, other than breaking an existing contract, or 8 of them, because we have 8 separate bargaining units, I can't imagine what that was a reference to unless it was in future years, but certainly not for purposes of this. But that was the discussion the other night. And I thought maybe I missed something. So to your knowledge, there are no contract flexibilities. I see. Okay, well then we'll continue on with considering these cuts.
Ms. Fisher?
I have a question about line item in central office 58400 reserve negotiations. That went up significantly. I just didn't know if there was some money that we can take out of that. So contract negotiations, not affiliated.
What was the number?
58400.
How would I respond? I would say that was based on which unions were being negotiated. We try to make sure that there's funding in there for the unions, the groups that are being negotiated. Right now, we're doing secretaries, custodians, which is a group of approximately 50 people. And then we have the librarians and the nurses right now. Trying to think of who was, last year, we had 1 year of secretarial custodial, which was an opener, and supervisors, which was a union of 2. So there's a significant difference in the number of people.
But then it says enrollment-based teacher additions or bus changes and extended day. In your specific report pages. 58400. The last page of central.
If I may answer that to the chairman.
Mr. Crowe?
Essentially, that language was in the budget document details from the year before and just got superimposed over.
I don't know, I just thought $122,000 this was, I mean, I understand there are 3 unions, but 2 of them are very small unions, I just thought that was
Ms. Golich?
Talking about the contracts, I know that, I'm sorry, let me back up. The contract notebook that I have is woefully out of date, so I don't know what contracts are up or presently being negotiated or not on negotiation. They're all up?
All online.
Just 3.
They're all online now, good. And the website's working.
Yes.
Yes.
Has it been considered to ask the unions if any of the membership would entertain an idea of forgiving a certain amount of their raise? Like if the teachers are getting a 2.9% raise, if they would be willing to forgive 1% of that raise? Or if they would be willing to forgive longevity payments? It's in order to save jobs, that it's presented that if you give up your longevity payment, you may save your colleague's job or your own job.
We've not entered into those discussions with the union at this time. So it just hasn't been brought up. We've not done that. If we were talking about significant cuts to that group, as I said, we're trying to go as far away from the students as possible, the ones who touch the students fewer times. And with the secretarial or clerical kinds of positions instead of the other cuts. And so, if we were talking massive cuts of teachers, I would think the teachers would want to enter into those conversations. At this point, I don't know that there's a lever to move them from my, and you're the chair of the negotiating team, Mr. Lowell.
We have not approached any of our unions to ask for any concessions or at this point in time. Again, I think the teachers union, we're in the 3rd year of a 3-year contract.
Right.
The 3rd year happens to be the end that was loaded. The front end, they took some zeros. So in each, most of our contracts were in that kind of condition. They have taken zeros in one of the years of the 3-year contracts. And so we haven't gone back and asked for concessions because of that at this point. We have not. We knew when we negotiated with them how this would lay out.
I think it may be worthwhile asking. The other question has to do with early retirements. Is there anyone that you know of that has announced an intention to retire in the 2013-14 academic year that may decide to go early with an incentive or something?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The teacher's contract has an early retirement clause, and they need to notify us by January 1st if they're going to retire, and there is an amount of funding that they receive after they retire.
So they notify you on January 1st for the following academic year? Or
Correct,
is
so
that
that,
academic?
so January 1st, 2014 for the 14-15 year, so that they're gonna retire in June, and that way we can make adjustments to the budget in January.
So the 13-14 year, you already know
We
who's
have,
retiring?
that is correct, we knew by January 1st, and we made all those adjustments.
Approximately 15 adjustments, I
That's
believe,
correct.
that have been made already in this budget for those folks that have submitted their retirement letters.
And you've already taken into account the salary savings?
That is
That's the projected vacancy rate?
That is correct.
Mrs. Bush?
I understand we realize savings when teachers and staff members move to the HSA plan. Is there a way to encourage staff members to move away from the standard plan to go to the HSA plan to save money to help the school district in general? Could we do something like that?
I would ask Mr. Percaro to address that, but I believe this is the current contract year where the teachers are absorbing all increases. So we're not paying for anything more than what we paid for in the prior years. That was what we negotiated. But Mr. Percaro, I don't know if you want to speak to if there's any way of getting any savings if they move sooner.
You are correct, Mr. Chairman. The other way, obviously, when the contracts come up, we would be moving to negotiate it as a mandatory requirement, and then for those contracts that currently, or immediately, we would be able to execute an amendment between the union and the board to effectuate that change sooner before the contracts come up for negotiation.
How much savings could we generate potentially if those unions were to shift prior to that point in time? Do we have an estimate? I think that's the point of your question, Ms. Bush.
That is correct.
You, Mr. House, need a few minutes to
Okay,
just
we'll
run calculations.
come back to that
Thanks.
when you have it. Other discussion? Mr. Percy?
The projected vacancy rate, well, you know what, let's leave that on the back burner, because that's Mr. Procaro too. The world language teacher, BCMS, you said in your run through, Dr. Conway, that the students would not be able to finish French or Spanish 1 at the middle school. Can you go a little deeper into that, please?
This was, I think, Mrs. Vijayshekar is here, as well as Mr. Kane, and that was my question this afternoon. We know we don't want to cut anywhere, and that was proposed to reduce it by 1. No one certainly wants that, but my question was, does that truly mean that students will not have enough hours and enough exposure to the language to pass French 1 and Spanish 1? And it is their belief that that is the case. I do know Mrs. Vijayshekar has the microphone if the chair will allow.
She does, and if she has any additional comments, please.
I just wanted to comment, I think the strength has been as we move through the middle school and the high school, we've been able to offer students ECE classes. It has been a real plus for them as they apply to college. I think even as late as 7th grade, we worry that we want to make sure that we get the kids to the proficiency level that they should be at when they move on to their college level classes. Kids are actually, returned to us to say that their preparation was very good based on the fact that they had that length of study. I think we've talked before with the board about extending even to 6th grade and to FLES. When we're thinking along those lines, to pull back would be a mistake. In fact, the counselor has often asked if there are additional staffing that we could send over from the high school to the middle school. So I know that they have been strapped to make sure that they, get the kids into the classes that they need to get into. I think it would mean, I'm sure Mr. Kane could speak to it too, it would mean that a difference in programming, it would become more like an elitist kind of programming where it would not be for everybody by reducing a teacher. So we would be pulling back quite a bit.
Ms. Fisher?
I just wonder, how many language teachers do we have right now, foreign language teachers, at the middle school?
There are 4 teachers.
And are they on teams, or how does it work?
No, they aren't on teams. In 7th and 8th grade, the students have an opportunity to take the world languages. They sign up for the world language after the 6th grade. And the classes are large, and it's
How
very
many?
popular.
How many students are in the classes?
You know, I don't have an exact number, I can get that number for you, but it's at least 24 to 25 per class, for sure, sometimes more.
So you have 2 Spanish teachers, 2 French teachers, I'm assuming?
We have a couple teachers who teach both.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And do all the 7th and 8th graders take the language, right?
No, but many do.
What percentage would you say?
I'd say due to the fact that some students are counseled into taking a reading resource, they probably end up with about 2 sections that don't take world languages, about 40 students, I'm going to say on an average, that are excluded from the world language program due to reading.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bush.
You spoke of a possibility to have a high school teacher maybe go down to the middle school to cover some of the world language. Is that a possibility?
We've actually discussed that so much and explored it. We have block schedules. You know, it's just not something that in a middle school schedule, it just doesn't, it will not work. So we have talked about that. And then we don't have like an extra teacher that could go down or even sections. We have all of our teachers sort of doubling up. In fact, we combine classes, college level, honors level together to have our classes, just so that we'll be able to meet the needs of all students. So we've had conversations, but it has not been one where we could actually send a teacher to the, even a portion of a teacher to the middle school. We use everybody we can at the high school.
Mrs. Fisher.
Sorry, I have another question.
No problem.
Right now, you say about 40 students in 7th and 8th grade 12 who do not take a foreign
Right.
language. By losing this teacher, how many more students would you project that would affect?
Well, I think some of those students would probably, it's hard to say right now, based on the schedule that we have for next year, but some may take a study hall instead of a world language. We do think that at least 1 year of world language would be able to, students would be able to matriculate, and it wouldn't give them what they have now, which is the 2 years opportunity that they can go to a second year at the high school. But we do think that we could give them, as some schools do, exposure to the language.
Other discussions or motions? Mr. Ducamp.
Yes, I'm just concerned about the reference to block scheduling. I don't know whether you referred to that as a good thing or a bad thing. I remember when we implemented it some time ago, and all I'm going to say is if that was something that isn't helping, we would want to consider that in the future. Block scheduling has been the way we've done things for some time now, not to go into it, but what did you mean by that?
Nothing at all, except that it would not be in sync with the schedule that the middle school is running, where they see the students every day. And our schedules are such that they're 84-minute blocks, and you'd have the few classes meeting, I guess 3 classes meeting one day and 2 classes the next day. So it would be difficult to schedule a teacher and provide travel time to go to the middle school, because their classes meet every day, and ours meet every other day. So.
All right, thank you. It's food for thought. That's all at this time then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Arnold.
The other evening, I asked Dr. Conway about districts. Are there districts similar to Vernon who don't have an assistant superintendent position? And you told me yes. We didn't elaborate, but you told me yes. So just for the sake of discussion, perhaps in an effort to save some of these things that we may find too difficult to remove, my first question would be if we eliminate the position, what are the ramifications to the person who was just hired?
Well, legally, certainly it would be backing out of a contract. We haven't signed the contract, I'll tell you, but we do have a verbal contract with him. And so Certainly, we would owe him funding for this year, possibly the entire amount, because he has already left his job. They're already replacing him or have replaced him. So there would be those ramifications. My other concern would be on the other side of that coin is how are we going to get the work done? I'm not concerned whether we call the positions director positions or assistant superintendent positions, but the work does need to be done. And generally, that would be, you would have 3 people in central office, which is what we have. The title is, it doesn't make that much difference to me. It may, I assumed it made a big difference to the Vernon Public Schools at one point.
Okay. For the same sake of discussion, if we can, I don't know what the configuration should be. Reducing an assistant principalship and then dividing responsibilities or whatever. If we could just talk that through somehow, just eliminating a position and then perhaps sharing, I don't know, half-time between the high school and the middle school, some kind of configuration that would eliminate one of those positions. Is that a possibility? Not whether you want to or not, but how could it be constructed?
You're right, I don't want to,
I
but
understand.
I will try to
I
answer in a
understand.
different way. I couldn't support that for a variety of reasons. First of all, the assistant principals do act like counselors, supporters. They work with our families, they work with our students in a very different way. So they have a direct connection, more so than the principal does, with our students in many ways. In addition, when you split those, even within the building, I know right now we have a half-time assistant principal at Center Road School who is wearing sneakers half the day and is wearing a suit and tie the other half of the day, or on some days. And it's very difficult to be in the right place at the right time. I had experience with a principal who did 2 buildings and was never in the right building at the right time and able to support what went on. And I think we would not get a half-time person at either building. It would be quarter-time paper pusher. We wouldn't get the connection with the kids. They wouldn't know the kids as much. I do not see that working. I understand looking at the position. I don't support that cut. I don't think it would be good for our kids.
Okay. And what about the half-time principal at Center Road School? That's one of my other questions.
That is a school, one of the reasons we asked for that to be put into the budget was because there are 2 Renaissance programs and an ELL program there. So there were special populations that were at that particular school. The school used to have an assistant principal who was also a half-time grade 5 teacher, I think, if I recall correctly. And that's a school of over 500 kids. And certainly it's needed. I know that assistant principal is very busy, whether it's with teacher evaluation, which he does, as well as discipline sometimes, and also dealing with the special populations. So I wouldn't recommend that cut. I'm not asking for a full-time position either. That person right now is doing the summer school, the same as an assistant principal at the high school and the middle school are doing summer school for those 2 particular buildings as well.
Dr. Connell, the assistant principal at Center Road School, is that not being paid by the Alliance District funding or
The Alliance District funding, that's what we put in Alliance District fund, yes.
So that position, that half position
Right, the
there is
other
being
half, the
paid.
PE position, however, is our budget.
That's our budget.
Right.
Exactly. The teaching positions in our budget, the half-time principal is currently in the Alliance District.
That is correct.
So that's part of our Alliance District plan.
To support the special populations.
So that number isn't represented in our
Right.
budget is what I just wanted to make sure Ms. Arns is clear on.
And when you discussed reducing art, music, and PE across the district, making reductions, why did that not make the light of your list?
We did discuss that at length, and of course, no one wants to do that
Right.
because of the connection to academics of art, music, and PE, especially good, healthy kids. It was a very sad discussion when we had it. People did understand we just need a program, and the board does get to define that program. 1 day a week, 1 day a month, 1 time a year for any of those things. As long as it's a program that happens every year, then that's sufficient for the State Board of Education. Probably not what they want, but sufficient to do that. The other thing is if, right now, those positions do provide opportunities for teachers to have their planning time, their contractual planning time, and to meet. The only time we would be able to do that on a consistent basis would be during lunch and recess. So we would be looking to hire a cadre of lunch and recess monitors, whether that's a paraprofessional job or just a monitor job. We would be needing to hire them to free teachers up, certainly for their duty-free lunch, but also during the recess time, that would be their opportunity to plan. It wouldn't be an opportunity for them to, that would be their personal planning time, but not an opportunity for them to get together and collaborate, so we'd be losing any time. So we do have people covering lunch and recess now, not every day, but in order to give people some opportunities to plan. That was one of the board's goals for last fall. You mentioned that you wanted to make sure there was collaboration time. So that would eliminate the collaboration time, and but we would be hiring, so it wouldn't be a complete offset, even though it's a significant amount of money if we went down. Kids in elementary school have PE twice a week. They have music and art once a week. It was very, very disheartening. None of our principals, or certainly our Jill Goldberg, did not want that either.
It's just an effort to step outside the box and be okay. And with that in mind, just one more question. We talked different times about shifting kids around, and VCMS could accommodate 5th graders, and Center Road School could accommodate kindergarten. Does it make any sense to discuss doing something like that and then redistributing 1st through 4th graders across other schools and close the school?
I'm sure when you started saying redistribute 1st through 4th, I thought you meant to create an early childhood center, and then you said close the school. So what would happen to the kindergartners and the pre-K?
How much room is there at Center Road School?
Empty rooms? Well, they use all the rooms, but they're, you can certainly.
But at one point you had talked about being able to house an entire special ed program at Center Road School.
Right, in half of the bottom wing, or actually a third, because it's in thirds in that area.
Right.
Did I hear you say moving 5th graders out to VCMS along
Okay.
with closing
sorry.
of a school? Because if we move all the 5th graders out to VCMS, that frees up spaces.
That frees up about
I
probably
think I heard you
11 or
say.
12 classrooms that frees up across the district. So there is certainly.
Is it worth the discussion? I'll just say, is it worth the discussion or not?
We have talked about that. We talked about opening a special ed school in one of our schools. And the distraction and the work that would cause right now in order to move this budget forward, we decided that we would look at other opportunities within our schools. Is there a wing, is there a portion? And right now we do have some space in the high school, and we are looking at the high school for a possible special ed school, and for a certain portion of that. So that's one of our ideas. We're still trying to flesh this out. As you can tell, it's brand new. Mrs. Buell is just bringing this up to us. So we looked at, you would want, if you opened a special ed school, you would move your pre-K into that school. So I'm using this as an example of closing one. Move your pre-K into that school for half the school. That would open up the other buildings for the other students, move the other students out. Most likely you could fit all-day K as long as the pre-K was out of there and you start a special ed school. And then you would probably want a school that was one floor so that you wouldn't have those issues. So you're now talking about Skinner or Northeast or possibly Lake to close. And it doesn't matter which of all 5 of our elementary schools, certainly. But the distraction that it would cause by having that conversation again, just 1 year after we've had the conversation, that parents did not want to move from their neighborhood schools. I think it would distract from the budget. I don't know that we'd ever get it passed. And so really, that was part of our conversation, was that it just, to do it in this context as a budget saving, we would not get the savings that we need, and probably wouldn't get the budget passed anyway.
Maybe not at the 11th hour, but it sure seems to me that that's something to,
Going forward,
this is
it's
not going
certainly
to
something.
get better next year and the year after, so maybe
Yes.
it's a discussion to have seriously.
Mrs. Fisher.
I just wanted to get a little more information on the alternative learning school and the risk account. If you have it, I don't know.
If Mrs. Buell would take the microphone again, she can address this, but we were talking about potential income. We have been very conservative in our design of a special ed school. We didn't want that really as a huge piece of this conversation because we cannot be assured that we are going to save. We're pretty certain that we can break even in the first year. We have 10 to 12 students who can return to district. However, that's all individual negotiations. Probably at least 5 of them, maybe up to 10, but probably 5 of them would come back. We then would have to create the staff, employ the staff to service those children, possibly renovate some building somewhere, some areas of the building, make sure there are bathrooms and all of that with the students. So the first year we were looking at hopefully a break-even situation. We have had conversations with several area districts, and their question is, when are you going to open? So that gives us hope that we would get students and possibly get students throughout the year. You know that students move into special ed schools at all times of the year. It doesn't have to be September 1st. And so we're very hopeful that we would have, right now we know of 5 students that would come from 2 different districts. We're very hopeful that we would have that and that these students would be able to move here to town. However, those students, of course, cost money as well. But what we would be looking for is the tuition that comes from those students to go directly to reduce the costs in those accounts. If a para had to be hired, then the para account would be reduced. If we needed a teacher, materials, special equipment, whatever that is, that it would be reduced. So our cost wouldn't be going up, our cost could actually be reduced. Because it wouldn't be, we don't have to hire a new teacher when we get 1 new student. If we got 20 new students, you hire a new teacher. So there would be a reduction to the costs we have now, as long as that money goes right to reduce the expenses that we have. And so we were trying to project where, you know, over $1 million this afternoon. And so we would have to be aggressive. We would have to open the school, plan. Mrs. Buell would be truly on the hot seat right now. She is planning, but we would have to make sure we open right at school. We would start advertising now and saying this is our plan. These are the kinds of needs we're going to service, and really trying to drum up that business so that we could do that. And again, it's speculative.
But it's also consistent with the town passing through the money, because the tuition payments come to the town.
Tuition payments as of now have come through the town. I have experienced completely the opposite, that any tuition, because you are spending the money for that, unless you budgeted for that, but any tuition that came in just reduced the expenses you had. That's just the way it worked. And so certainly that can come to the town. It's not illegal.
But that would be something we'd have to negotiate.
We
because
would
it's
have
not
to,
current
we would
practice.
have to, correct, we would have to make that very clear and get that agreement with the town.
We didn't want to do something on speculation. If we did
It is speculation.
Thank you.
Ms. Goldrich.
I have a general question, I think it may be for Mr. Picaro. We currently have $326,647.44 left to cut, is that true?
326, 647, 44.
326.
So we have, after all-day K, we would have 230,000 Alliance dollars left to go somewhere, true? We would also have the $200,000 or $250,000 Medicaid reimbursement. Let's call that $430,000, and windfall money for next year?
That's, you're talking next year's budget, and I believe Mr. Picaro has indicated that that's been accounted for in next year.
For the Medicaid money,
Yeah,
The 200,000?
the 200,000 would be for this
this
year.
year.
And for next year, our revenue projections are at 150,000.
150,000.
So we've already increased our projections.
So next year, the $380,000 to the good. So is it necessary for us to find another $326,000 to cut?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the Alliance District money is based on an application process, and though it's very favorable that the difference between the governor's proposed and appropriations amount that came out of the appropriations committee is close, we still don't know what the final amount's going to be. That won't be available until the end of the legislative session when that gets finally voted on from the state budget. So there's some risk involved with banking on the Alliance District money. The same holds true for the Medicaid money. That would be based on an assumption that the town would provide us access to those revenue dollars, which we still need to figure out.
And the remaining $319,000 that we've talked about, say we only need 10 in this fiscal year, that would leave us 200 and, I can't do that in my head. 300.
Those would be available to us.
So that is going to be available to us.
Correct.
So is it necessary for us to cut another $326,000 if we are going to have these other dollars available?
I do believe we need to take the action, and I think it's because we've already projected this in the budget, and thus it's revenue to the town. It isn't, we've already accounted for that in the budget that we're discussing.
The $319,000?
Oh, I'm sorry, 319.
No, that's,
That
so,
is,
that
we're
won't be
always looking at,
available.
yeah, whatever portion is remaining after that action is taken.
so say we only need the 10 grand for this fiscal year, we would still have 309 available for next year.
Mr. Percy wants to weigh in, and they'll give him a moment.
We're getting 120, well, we should be getting 128,580 according to state law.
Right.
We already know we're negative in that account for next year, so can we account for that 128,580 for next year also?
That-
Through you, Mr. Chairman, according to the state guidance documents, that should be our funding for this year, and we would expect to see that revenue for next year as well. But that's,
So we're down to 200 then.
I would agree.
So we'll have the 309 plus the 128.5 plus the maybe.
I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute recess and regroup in 5 minutes, give people a chance to get synced up. It's always about the children. I always wanted to do that.
I was standing right here.
$0.25 a chair. All right, let's go, cough it up. 25 cents a chair to sit, all right? Let's go.
Okay. We're back to our session here. I do want to share with the board members, Mr. Carr does have the number that we can talk about on potential HSA savings if we could get a ship. And in order to discuss that, board members would need to go into an executive session to talk about that because of the sensitive nature of that, towards contract negotiations. So we could do that and we could leave the room so that everybody else doesn't have to leave the room. If you're outside of the room, take one of the other things. Mrs. Wilson.
I'd like to make a motion, we go into executive session. Executive session to talk about the HSA.
And we want to invite Mr. Picaro and Dr. Conway.
Strategy with respect to negotiations.
Yeah, and the purpose would be for strategy and negotiation.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Mr. Percy is a second. Is there any discussion on that motion? Mr. Kevin?
We still come back to this?
Yeah, we're coming back to this meet. We're going to take 5 minutes in executive session or whatever it takes for Mr. Picaro to share his information. He has the information prepared for us. We want to do that in the appropriate way. And we'll be back in, yes, we do need to vote. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor? Now we vote. Okay, we're back in regular session, and based on our discussions, we are going to, I would assume, make some type of a motion to have Mr. Picaro approach the unions and see if we can request discussion regarding the medical and see if we can get any movement towards the HSA. So I think that would be an appropriate.
So moved.
And Mr. Percy?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on that to have Mr. Picaro contact our unions that are not currently in the HSA to see if we can get some additional shift? Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote by show of hands. All in favor of that motion? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Other actions? Mrs. Arnold.
I'd like to move to reduce 58400 contingency account by $25,000.
58400. And the dollar amount?
$25,000.
$25,000. And seconded by Mrs. Fisher. And a motion by Mrs. Arn and a second by Mrs. Fisher to reduce the account 58400 by $25,000. Is there discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a vote by a show of hands. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Any other motion? Mrs. Arndt.
I move to reduce account 52172 by $130,000.
That is account 52172 by $130,000. And do I have a second? Mrs. Gold. I have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on that motion? No discussion. I will ask for a vote by a show of hands. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Okay, so that, I don't know if we have a, Ms. Fisher, Ms. Arndt.
Could I just request the map?
Mr. Picaro, do we have an updated number?
Yes. We currently, through you, Mr. Chairman, we are currently at $887,945.56 in board approved cuts. We currently have $171,647.44 to go.
Mr. Percy.
I could have a quick discussion on the two risk accounts that were on the administration's budget reduction worksheet. I know we talked about the alternative learning school. We have not talked about the projected vacancy rate. Could we get a quick summary on that from Mr. Picaro, please?
Mr. Picaro or Dr. Conley, whoever has the... Mr. Picaro?
Whatever you'd like, boss.
That's what Mr. Finance usually says. The projected vacancy rate is, was explained to me, a new phrase for me, is that savings that you accrue when an employee leaves and then there's a period of time before you're actually able to hire the new employee. Now, in a lot of school situations, you've got to have a body in a classroom, so, and schools are cyclical. Teachers don't generally leave in November or January, they leave at the end of the school year. But there are many of our employees who are 12-month employees and do leave at different times of the year. We were able, in the budget mitigation plan, to save, since February 1st, $55,000. So in looking at that, over the course of the year, not that we would be in a budget freeze, but, or a hiring freeze, but it's very possible. You know, I would not go any higher than the amount that we projected for you, but I do believe that it's possible with those gaps.
Mr. Percy.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept that risk account because it did help us in our current budget year for the $49,272.72. Appreciate a second.
Motion, Ms. Bush.
Second.
A motion and a second to accept the risk account. Is there discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote by a show of hands. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Excuse me, that's closer to 72,000. I would assume somewhere in that neighborhood. Mr. Carl will give us an update in a moment, but is there any other actions? Mrs. Bush?
I'd like to make a motion that the alternative learning school risk account also would be removed from the budget. Or added to the budget, the risk.
Oh, okay, I thought we just did both of those.
Oh,
We
I thought we
that
only did the
motion.
projected vacancy.
My motion was only for the vacancy rate.
Okay, I
Yeah.
apologize. I thought we did, okay.
No, we
so
can do both.
I got it. I
So I'm
apologize.
doing this other
Yep.
part of the risk account.
I got you. I have a motion. Do I have a second? Mr. Burst?
I'll second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on that? I apologize for the confusion. Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a vote by a show of hands. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Other action, Mrs. Arnold?
Could we just get a math update?
Yep, Mr. Carl?
For you, Mr. Chairman, we are currently at $986,491 even in approved cuts. We have $73,102 left to go.
73,102. And I would entertain other motions or discussion. Ms. Goldich?
I have a general question about line 55210, general liability insurance. And I believe it would be a question for Mr. Picaro, whether or not we could reduce that amount. The increase is 42,461. Is there some level of risk we can take in that account?
Through the chairman, on that account, I would strongly advise that we do not touch that account. There's a bid process that we're working on in conjunction with the town, and based on current experiences for our town board, as well as some other external factors nationally, we're expecting it to be close, if not a little bit under.
Other discussion or actions? Mrs. Fisher?
I'd just like to ask a question about the laptop card at BCMS. Do they have a laptop card, or how many computers is it for? Or just some details?
Mr. Lemoy is in the audience, and Mr. Davis would then like to speak to that. The portable mic is in.
Can you repeat the question?
I just want to know about the laptop card. Do we already have one at BCMS? How many computers are you looking to accommodate?
We have one currently in the library. I think there are 24 laptop computers with it.
And you want another cart? Do you have another 24 computers to put on that cart?
That's what we would do.
The card includes, it means 24 computers on it.
Ah. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
Like, that's not the card.
it's not just the card.
Thank
It's
you. That feels so much better.
It's a package.
Thank you.
Other discussion or action? Giving you all a minute to take a look at. Ms. Sarno?
Can I request a 5-minute recess?
I would entertain a 5-minute recess. We are in recess for 5 minutes. I would entertain motions or discussion. Mrs. Arnold.
I move to reduce the budget for the security guard in the amount of $22,088 to cover it. I withdraw my motion.
She withdrew her motion.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'll defer to Mrs. Bush.
Let me pull out the email.
Mrs. Bush?
I'd like to make a motion to remove, I don't have a line item because I'm working on something else, the e-readers.
This is the list that was proposed.
Yes, the district e-readers and the Kindle Paperwhite e-readers from RHS for a total of $9,030.
I have a motion, Mr. Percy.
I'll give you the second for the sake of discussion.
I have a second for Mr. Percy. Ms. Bush, or anybody wish to discuss the motion? Mr. Percy.
I just want to know what your rationale is.
My rationale is I'd rather not cut teachers right now when possible monies can be realized in the future to purchase those at some point.
Ms. Goldrich.
I would like to ask Mr. Picaro what monies could be pointed toward this kind of equipment in the future, and how secure would that budget line be?
Mr. Pearl.
Through the chair, we could certainly look at E-rate monies to purchase some of that technology at that amount of money.
And that's an approved funding source for that, so, I mean, that's where that E-rate money comes in towards technology. We usually purchase technology with that money.
So would it be possible to remove the rest of the technology from this particular plan, or no?
Through the chairman, that would be, I think, outside our comfort zone. The E-rate money will not, I mean, this is going to be cutting extremely close to what our E-rate projections are for revenue. Those aren't guaranteed, those are projected revenues that we budget on, and I would not go any farther than that.
So the E-rate budget is pretty small.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other discussion on the proposed motion to review the e-readers from both the high school and district. Mrs. Arnold.
Would the maker of the motion consider just reducing technology by a certain amount and then let administrators or Mr. Lemoy decide what he's not buying? Like we do reduce the technology account by $9,000 and then let him decide, or those people smarter than us decide what he's not going to purchase.
I'd be willing to just reduce that account,
The technology.
specifically the technology account,
Friendly amendment.
by $9,300.
No,
Or 9,030, is that it? Yeah, I had my zeros in the wrong place.
So that's a friendly amendment, and the seconder is in agreement to reduce the technology budget by $9,030. And any further discussion on that motion? Ms. Gold.
What is the object code for that? Is that 53339? Or,
Through the chair, 57710, computer hardware.
thank you.
57710 is the account. Thank you. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'm going to call that to a vote by a show of hands. All in favor? And those opposed? I show one opposed. The motion does carry. Mr. Percy.
Question for either Mr. Picaro or Dr. Conway. This year, we realized MLR money. I don't know what the acronym stands for. It was $92,000 that we got back from the insurance company for whatever reason. I know we can't budget in that. Is that a possibility of getting another MLR next year?
Through the chair, we've requested, we've made a formal request to see if there is any funding, but my sense is there's will likely be no funding available, or if any, little, because the insurance companies have adjusted their business tactics and approach to make up for paying those excessive costs to us, back to us.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bush.
I'd like to make a motion to reduce account 52175 by $50,000.
52175 by 50,000.
Prescription drug.
Yes.
And Mr. Percy?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to reduce the prescription drug account by $50,000. It's account 52175. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a vote by show of hands. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Can we get a updated total? Thank you, Lily.
Through the chair, the board has approved $1,045,521 in cuts. We have $14,072 left to go.
14072. Do I have any further motions?
Can I ask a question about the security guard? Are there any possible grants out there that could help us get a security guard for the school?
We've been informed that the state and the federal government are providing some grants, but my understanding is those are more for materials such as panic buttons and possibly other reconstruction to create some kind of an airlock vestibule for people to enter. I have not heard it for personnel. Mr. Picard, have you heard any for personnel?
No.
And if I may, just the security guard, right now we have a person who is acting as a door person. So we had added a person at the high school, not in our current budget. So this would fund that person going forward. But we did that in 3 of our buildings. Not
So
successful.
we already have someone in this.
There is a person there that is not in next year's budget, but we did that as in the wake of, because we needed someone in the front entryway.
So potentially, we could apply for a grant to upgrade the vestibule and not need that person's
That's
services.
correct. That's correct. It wouldn't happen immediately.
Yeah, but
Eventually, you're correct.
Mr. Percy?
Two things. We could also use CNR money to do the upgrades at our schools to avoid that person. But we've cut $1,045,000 tonight. We're $14,000 away. We've been here for 3 hours. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second on that motion? Seeing no second,
Second for the sake of discussion.
there's no discussion. That's a non-debatable motion. If we adjourn, we are adjourned. So if there is a second, it is non-debatable. We vote, I should say. We could vote no, not to adjourn. There we go. Is there a second? Seeing none, we will continue and see if we can get the final $14,072. Ms. Gold.
I'd like to make a motion to reduce the Board of Legal Services by $15,000. Object code 53332.
53332, legal services by 15,000. And Mrs. Arn,
Second.
it's a motion and a second. And is there discussion on that motion? Mr. Kim?
That's, what we have currently budgeted is not a lot of money currently, so that's definitely rolling the dice. You can do it, it's been done before, but I don't know what else is in the offing that we'll need to spend it on. I mean, you have contractual challenges as well as other legal reasons legal assistance is brought in, so I don't know how practical this is.
Yes,
I would, in other years, I might have agreed to that, only this year we are negotiating a teacher's contract and needing us to use our lawyer through all those negotiations. I'm not sure how much we would need to cover that. I would defer to Dr. Conlon.
If I may, Mr. Chair, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. That was my concern when the motion was made as well, was that the teacher's contract, and of course, certainly we hope that we finish the contract within the normal timeframe. However, that could lead to a mediation and arbitration, which is extremely costly. So it's certainly prudent to be careful in that account. We did add to that account because we were bargaining. And I don't think we added a lot to the account. I think we added without the meetings.
Other discussion? Mrs. Bush?
Gotta get there.
The motion was seconded by Mrs. Arnold. It's a motion by Ms. Goldage and a second by Mrs. Arnold. We're discussing the motion to reduce 15,000. Mrs. Arnold.
I understand you're suggesting that there's a potential for risk in that account then, but perhaps the negotiators and Mr. Dorsey can, I mean, does he have to be at every meeting? I'm suggesting maybe there's a way to work something out with Mr. Dorsey, that he doesn't have to be at every negotiating session, or some way to reduce the exposure, but,
Technically, that is the union that we, the administrators union and the teachers union is where we have our legal counsel there with us almost the whole way, because it is, they're there during the strategy, they're there during the discussions. If we go to the mediation, et cetera, it is a position that I don't think we want to go into those waters without representation. I just think it's too risky. Ms. Coolidge?
What is the year-to-date expenditure? I would ask Mr. Picaro.
Mrs. Bush. And we're going to get your answer to your, he's looking up your question. There's a motion currently. And Mr. Percy, while Mr. Picaro is looking up the information.
Last year, we didn't have many contracts negotiated. So this year, we're negotiating 4 of our 8.
Mr. Chair, I do have that information. $75,000 was budgeted. We still have a balance of $51,729 in that account.
And 6 weeks left to go in the fiscal year.
That is correct. We're not done with that, but we're just beginning to negotiate at this point with 3 groups. He's only involved in one.
Yes, he's been
One right now,
so
right?
far. We haven't brought him in for the others yet.
And we're in the middle of labor hearing as well.
Mr. Picaro, do you have?
Sorry.
No, just vote.
We're good. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote by a show of hands. All in favor to reduce 53332 by 15,000. And those opposed? And that motion does fail 4-2. Mrs. Bush.
I'd like to reduce account 56140 by $14,072 for paint supplies. 56140, we have no painter. Paint supplies.
14,072 from paint supplies.
14,072.
Is there a second on that motion? Did I have a second on the motion? Mr. Bush.
Sure, second.
Wasn't sure, so we're backing up. So motion by Mr. Bush and a second. Is there any discussion on reducing paint supplies? Seeing none, I'm going to call that motion to a vote by a show of hands. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Is there any final motions that we wish to?
Mrs. Fish.
Motion to adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Mrs. Fisher? I have a motion to adjourn in a second. All in favor? And we are adjourned.
Yeah.